Welcome to the Doctor's Eyes Only podcast, brought to you by Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, where we are on a mission to help the highest caliber physicians achieve wealth that matters.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Doctor's Eyes Only podcast. I'm your host today, Brad Quick. I'm the president and one of the partners of Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors. I am really thrilled today to have one of my very good friends from the orthopedic business, somebody I've known a very long time. Matter of fact, I met this gentleman right when he was leaving fellowship. He's a friend of one of my very dear friends, other dear friends in orthopedics. So by way of introduction, Sharat Kusuma is an orthopedic surgeon who did his residency at Penn, did a fellowship in joint recon at the Rush University at Rush in Chicago. Kind of, Sharat, you can probably share, it's like the house that built Zimmer, if you think about it, right?
And Brad, my admission was a clerical error, no doubt, but so you better to be lucky than good.
Yes, sure. We can dispute that, my friend. I've seen you work, and I've read the press clippings, which are pretty good. But did another fellowship in Nottingham, kind of cool, where I guess you learned a little bit about hip resurfacing.
Yeah, the Queen's Medical Center is, I think it's the largest hospital in Europe, in terms of the number of beds or something. But yeah, it's a pretty large hip and knee department. A guy named Mr. As you know, in the UK, they call them Mr. Right, Mr. Andrew Mankdalo. And so we can talk more about that later in the session here.
Practiced clinically in Ohio for a bit before moving on to some amazing ventures. And this is the fun part, Sharat. I really want to dig into some of this, but places like Apple and the My Mobility app for Zimmer Biomet, when you worked there, we had the pleasure of working together there a little bit again. McKinsey for some management consulting and on the medical space, right? Joined Exactech. And one of the leaders there, chief medical officer, and led some of the businesses. And then most recently, really cool, I'm looking forward to hearing more about this story, the president and member of the board for Joint Medica. So Sharat, welcome to the show, my friend.
Well, thank you. And again, like you said, you've been a good friend to me in my career, coming way back when I was just coming out of training. And so it's great. We both made career transitions, right? You and I have both maybe been around the same time. We're both sort of, I guess, lifelong learners and career journeymen of sorts, right? So we had to share that kindred spirit. So it's great to join you on the show. Thanks I appreciate the opportunity. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, no, the honor is all mine, my friend. So despite being football season and being a Purdue grad, I got to go there.
No doubt. You forgot the most important of all the institutions. You forgot to name the one that is perhaps the most important of all.
Correct. Yeah. So Vandy, you share that obviously in common with our CEO Lauren, as you know, but
that's right.
I think maybe you spent a little more time there. Tell me about your time at Vandy, and then why don't you share, how did Vandy go from being a baseball school to a football school?
Well, if I knew the latter, I would probably be coaching football right now, and that would be career number 4. But yeah, Vandy, I'm a trifecta at Vandy. I went to undergraduate there, did all my pre-med and molecular biology and stuff at Vanderbilt. And then I got into medical school, was very fortunate to get into Vandy Med School. And so I stayed there for med school. And then I did my combined MD. And back when I'm getting older now, back when I did that, it was kind of new and novel to do a combined MD MBA program. But anyway, so I spent 9 years in Nashville, very fond years. Yeah, it was an awesome time. And yeah, back to the football thing. So I don't know if you remember, in 2009, we got up to being ranked number 11. I think we were undefeated. I think we were maybe 7-0. We beat Auburn. And I don't know if you remember, we got up to being ranked number 11. And of course, it's sort of, but we still made a bowl game. And so this year, if for all the listeners out there, for all the Bama fans, I'll throw a Roll Tide, somewhat in jest and sarcasm. If you guys remember about a month ago, we beat Bama, number 1 ranked Bama. At Vanderbilt Stadium. And I don't know if you saw the videos of the students carrying the goalpost. And of course, with the Vanderbilt nerdy, of which I'm certainly in that bucket, where they probably figured out the physics and the most efficient way to carry the goalpost down West End Avenue and dump it and they probably figured out the buoyancy and things as well to make sure it floated. But yeah, so it's amazing that we're 6 and we lost last weekend, of course, South Carolina, but still we're 6-4 and, looking bowl bound, which happens sort of Halley's Comet and Vanderbilt going to bowls happens about the same frequency in human history. So, but it's something else, it's pretty cool that we beat, and we could argue we could have won the Missouri game. We could have won a couple more games, but yeah, it's pretty cool to see that we're having a heck of a football season.
They're competing for sure. Well, the other thing, I didn't even think about this till now. So another thing you and I have in common my good friend Zach Eady, playing for the Grizzlies, and then of course Pippen Jr. is there. Actually, both of those guys doing really well together. So Pippen Jr. was a Vandy guy too in hoops, I believe.
I had forgotten about that. And like you said, I mean, normally we're a little bit better in basketball than we are at football, but it's been pretty fun. The quarterback, and then our kicker, right? I don't know if you've seen our kicker, but like he's made like 5 or 6 field goals over 50 yards this year.
Wow.
which have been sort of a pivotal in our 6-4 records. Yeah, it is. I wish I could have been there, because the years I was there, right, at Vanderbilt, between 94, 98, like around that time, we were not very good at football at that time. So I can imagine how fun it would have been to be on campus for a Bama victory when they're ranked #1 in the country. I mean, must have been a big party.
Yeah,
a break from the textbooks for a night, and then a little bit of partying on West End Avenue, I suppose. But
100% fun time. Yeah. So the kind of taking us back a little bit, we mentioned Rush, and the other, one of the other things. Boy, I feel like we got a ton in common, my friend. But my good friend Aaron Rosenberg, who is, we both know is kind of one of the giants in this business, early. And so one of the reasons we connected is Aaron, told us, boy, this guy is somebody you ought to keep an eye on. And, met you and kind of saw that, right? Here's a guy, 100 miles an hour, hair on fire, and nothing's changed there. What do you think Aaron saw in you, kind of even far, going back there, kind of, that stood out?
Well, if you really get a couple of beers in Aaron, what he'll tell you that's most memorable is I was the first Indian guy he had met with a very thick Southern drawl. And unfortunately, that may have been my most distinguishing characteristic at the time. But I mean, well, first of all, it's super flattering for a guy of Aaron's stature. And of course, we stayed good friends. I actually just had dinner with Aaron a couple of months ago. Yeah. We stayed very close friends. And I can't say exactly, but I mean, I worked hard, in fellowship, and I was again fortunate to sort of be able to work with that great group at Rush with Wayne Proprosky and Aaron and Rich Berger and Craig. And I've stayed in close touch with all of them, and Josh Jacobs. And I guess, Brad, my personality pretty well. I'm sort of that annoying kid. Continue to ask questions all the time, no matter, like, well, why is this? Why does this work this way? Why does that? Maybe that was it. I don't really know. But again, regardless, I just had a lot of varied interests even during my fellowship. And I always used to, Aaron's been a great mentor, and he was actually one of the ones who encouraged me, if I was considering a career switch, to actually make a career switch. And so, we can talk more about that. Yeah. But I suppose, again, I can't say exactly what it was, but like I said, I tried my best to work hard and be a good team member, when I was there, and sort of help contribute, to the department. So maybe there was something there, but I hate to say, I think it was a Southern drawl. That was Wayne Proprosky will tell that story 100 times. Like, I met this guy named Sharat, and he talked kind of funny. I'm like, well, maybe we should bring him into our department. So,
that's funny.
Anyway.
That's funny. So how did you make the decision, Sharat, to go into medicine? I know a little bit of this story, but why don't you share with kind of some of our listeners?
Yeah, well, I'm that generation of, first generation. Well, my parents immigrated from India in the mid 70s, and I was, of course, born in the United States. And, my father's a physician, and actually, crazy statistic. So my father went to a pretty good medical school and came from a very, very abject, super poor family. And, I've had the chance to visit India, multiple times. I've actually had a chance to operate there and do things like Operation Walk. We can talk about that, anyway, so my father, came over to America after finishing medical school, and it was all, he got through school. His family had no money at all. So it was everything for him was sort of merit-based scholarship. And then, of course, he came to this country, barely spoke any English, and sort of typical story, immigrant story, and, was a very prolific gastroenterologist, and actually continues to be so. My dad's 78 years young, and I guess maybe a little bit of a chip off the old block. I probably had some of the similar DNA. He still works 4 days a week, and he can still do endoscopies and ERCPs and things. And just one little cool thing about it, and you can tell probably from the way I tell the story how much admiration I have for my dad. He was the first gastroenterologist in Georgia. This is back in the early 80s, right? A long time ago. He was the first one, I believe, like south of Macon, Georgia. He was it. Like, there was nobody else. So back then in Albany, Georgia, is not a small town. It's 100,000 people. And of course, the catchment area, maybe a couple 100,000 people. I mean, Dad took call. I mean, get your head around this. We obviously talk nowadays about work-life balance and we can talk about that. But my dad took call every single night for like the first 10 years of his career. He never had, not even weekends, every single night, because he's the only gastroenterologist, south of Macon, and of course, but given where he came from, he didn't look at it as something that was a burden. He thought it was a privilege to be able to come to this country and, take call every night, So I mean, it was a different time, but I just have so much admiration. So a long-winded answer to your question. I had so much admiration for my dad. I'm like, I want to be just like him when I grow up. So when I was little, it was kind of always the assumption that I would kind of end up in that direction. And so it was pretty easy. And I, just to give you a little bit more background, my brother is a plastic surgeon in Miami. My first cousin, my dad's brother's son, is also an orthopedic surgeon in the Chicagoland area, not far from where you're sitting right now. And so we have a lot of doctors in my family.
What a legacy. You think about the number of lives he touched in that part of the world, right? I mean,
well, yeah, I mean, a funny story I'll tell you, Ashley, just really quick. When I was in 6th grade, remember back when you used to go from like elementary school to middle school, and you would switch class, and like, middle school was kind of where you got lockers, and you had like the boys' locker. It's kind of, you got to be a little bit of so the middle school coach was this really big guy named Coach King, like really famous guy, huge biceps and super intimidating. Well, the first day of school, when I went to middle school, he's like, hey, Kusuma, I got to tell you something. Your dad took care of me, and he inflicted some pain. And I won't go into too much detail of what that pain may have been, but he's like, you're going to pay me back for the next 3 years. And so in front of the whole class, he, and in my funny story of kind of only in America, like an Americana type story that, a son of an immigrant going to middle school and getting railed by the and we ended up being great friends. My point is, I mean, he took care of everybody in Southwest Georgia over the course of his career, and literally everybody knew. And so I had a lot of admiration, again, just because he was so well respected in the community, and had taken such good care of so many people. But some funny stories came along with it as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I think half my friends' parents, my dad had done an endoscopy on them or something, somewhere along the way, because he was the only expert in that field.
So tell me about, so you're in practice, and again, doing a lot of great work and consulting, and so before we leave that part, I mean, you had some really cool opportunities to do things like on the Zook, which Zook PSI. I still remember your manual versus robotic paper, and we use that a lot. But how did you get associated kind of with that whole side of the business, which just some amazing guys and some of the people you met there?
Well, I think you and John Walters and others at Zimmer had a lot to do with that, and of course Aaron. But I mean, the way it all happened, as you recall, again, I was fortunate to spend time at Rush, and of course, at Rush, we learned a little bit of everything, right? And then, as Rush was so, Zimmer and Rush were such great partners, right? I mean, Zimmer was contributed so much to the education. So we learned all the Zimmer implant systems, the next gen knee. And, just as an example, my grandmother has 2 next gen knees that I put in myself. My little grandmother, 89-year-old grandmother back in India, back in Hyderabad. So, I mean, just to give you sort of the level of how much Zimmer, has meant to my life and my career. But anyway, so, as we learned the ZUK, or the MG2, sort of a predecessor, not predecessor, but sort of the next iteration. The successor to that. And we got so good at that implant. And, I suppose you and others sort of, maybe put in a word that, hey, this guy knows how to do this operation. And so I passionately sort of embraced. I was one of those folks during my board collection period. I guess I wasn't that, I don't know, maybe a little, I don't think cavaliers, but I guess I wasn't afraid of doing operations maybe that, like unique compartmental knees and resurfacing and things during the board collection. So I just jumped right in and started doing them, and I got comfortable with them. And then after, I don't know if you remember this, did you come with me on one of these trips? After I finished my sort of first few months of practice, I got a chance to go to Marseille, France, and work with John Noel Argenson and Sebastian Perrot and those guys. And so I increased my education. And then, of course, in Columbus, I had the privilege of working closely with guys like Adolph Lombardi and Keith Barrett and stuff, and learning, the Oxford philosophy from them. And so 1 year in, I had gotten to where my practice was, maybe 40% unis, right? I was and you remember I was doing so. And so that's sort of how that all came about. And that led to, lots of educational and consulting opportunities at Zimmer, which I was fortunate at Zimmer, but really enjoy. And again, a lot of my unis, I still get a chance to follow up with my patients that I've done, actually one of the, just as an example, one of my groomsmen in my wedding, his mom has 2 Zooks I put in 13 years ago. And I just played golf with him about 2 weeks ago. And she is, I mean, and I saw I got her to email me, and the x-rays are just, and so, those are
they're
cool,
perfect, I bet.
cool. So my point is, I was always sort of a believer that if you did them right, they would work, not just as a temporizing operation, but for a long, long time. And so, and, of course, Rush published a lot of that data from the MG2 series back in the 80s. And he's right that, 20-year follow-up, 22-year follow-up. And right. So, anyway, that was sort of the uni pathway. And then I guess one little other snippet of the story that was interesting, and I've just kind of recalled this. We got a robot before robots were cool in 2010. The robot was really an amazing learning tool to understand like correction angle, because you have the real-time data. And so kind of merging that into the Zook technique, it just really sort of accelerated the education and the comfort level. So long way to answer your question, just I had a huge passion for sort of learning all those different kinds of operations. And so, and that led to the opportunities to work with, Jimmy Wood and and Aaron and Dr. Rosenberg and Dr. Rand and all that whole group, right? Which was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's a really cool group. Yeah, for sure. And that, the registry data on that device speaks for itself clearly, right? So a lot of folks I read, and we can talk here in a little bit about the mental health aspect of, surgery nowadays and kind of all the headwinds facing the orthopedic surgeons. But how'd you make that decision to jump, and kind of what was next then for you?
When I finished medical school stroke business school in 2002, 2003, I don't know if you remember back then, but that was sort of right after the dot-com bust, and sort of well enough in advance. The economy was, sort of back screaming again, right? And, the market was pretty frothy. And remember, the financial crisis happened in 2008, 2009. And so I will say, when I finished business school in 2000, or sort of medical school, I was at a crossroads even then. This is before I'd started practice. When I was thinking about going into residency, I thought, well, gosh, my friends from business school were taking cool jobs at McKinsey and, at Goldman Sachs and things, and doing cool stuff. And so at that moment, I remember thinking, gosh, should I maybe take even a departure at that point before going to residency, right? At Penn, and maybe try something. But then, again, probably by some clerical mistake, I got a position at Penn, which was obviously a great institution. So I decided to go through residency, ended up loving it. The point I'm trying to make is, I had a professor at business school at Vanderbilt, Professor Jim Cooper. I don't know if you know the name, but he was in the House of Rep. He's a pretty famous guy. He was in the Clinton administration in the House of Representatives. And if Jim's listening, he's a very, he's still around. Jim's father, I believe, was governor of Tennessee. And Jim was, again, an attorney. And then he was in the House. He got into the House of Representatives from Tennessee, I think when he was 28 years old, like really a prolific politician. And he taught a health policy class at Vanderbilt. And it was like one of the most amazing classes I've ever had. And he really influenced my thinking. Anyway, look him up, Jim Cooper.
Yeah, we'll do that.
He was mayor of Nashville for a while. I mean, he's a pretty famous guy in the Tennessee area. And so anyway, my point is, when I was finishing medical school at that time in business school, Jim really influenced my thinking a lot. And, he said, you should consider not going into clinical practice. You seem like the kind of person that would be interested in health policy or the business side of healthcare. So anyway, that little bug was in the back of my brain all along. So come to 2013, I'll never forget it. And this is the true story, Brad. 13, Christmas Eve, which was on a Friday. If you can look in the calendar, because I remember this like the detail. And I was working, probably overworking. I was doing a lot of hips and knees, as you know, and it was pretty busy, and I was enjoying practice, but I wouldn't say it was much burnout as it was. I had this lingering curiosity that there was this big world out there on the business side of healthcare. And it was this sort of nebulous world that I felt I knew nothing about. And I felt like there was this machine, working in the background, a machine at the implant companies, and a machine in the health systems, at Ohio Health and Ohio State where I was working. I felt like the curiosity of just sort of what happens behind those closed doors where I, as the clinician, I'm not allowed. That curiosity was just, it was nagging at me, right? And so that feeling was building up. And in practice, I love practicing. I love putting hits and knees in, right? But after you're 6-7 years into practice, 5-6 years into practice, there is an element of, this is not bad or good. I'm just making a statement that it does become a little bit repetitive, especially in hip and knee, like what we do. And we do 6 or 7 operations, right? We do revision, knees, for, well, also if you add the right and left, you can double that. We do 16 operations, I guess. Right? So anyway, but, and so that curiosity was just killing me. So totally on a whim, in Christmas Eve 2013, I went to the McKinsey. McKinsey, as you know, is the management consulting firm, been around for 100 years and, quite prolific firm. I put in an application because I had a couple of friends from business school that were working there, and I had a couple other friends who had sort of, who had just, said, hey, you should consider looking at, if you're interested in leaving clinical medicine. And so I dropped an application on Friday evening. And then my Monday morning, I woke up and I had an email in the inbox that said, hey, we'd like to, again, it's probably some algorithm that went wrong, that went haywire, picked the wrong application. But anyway, so I got the interview, and then anyway, went through the rigorous, McKinsey has this insane interview process, right? You have to take like an IQ test. I mean, it is just nuts. Like it's a 4-stage, it takes like 3 months to get through. So anyway, I got through the process and ended up being offered a position. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but the real reason was because I really needed to know more about what was going on in the healthcare system behind the closed doors where I never got to go as a busy clinician. I just had to know. I had to know what was going on. And so I'd always intended I would maybe do it just for a couple of years and then come back to practice, and it would be a good leadership, skill building thing. And so we can talk, but the rest is sort of proverbial history, but that's how I got there. And I guess I'll just say one more thing. This is going to sound a little bit soapboxy, but I promise it's not like that at all. It's going to sound a little bit pontificating, but I've got a ton of, my wife is a clinician, she's a nurse practitioner, and I have lots of friends who are doctors and nurses and healthcare practitioners. And I believe this firmly. And if you look at some of the, if you read the sort of the venture capital newsletters lately about, digital health companies, one of the biggest insights you'll see is that the reason a lot of these companies are not doing well is because they don't have enough frontline clinicians in the leadership levels of the company. And I firmly believe that there should be opportunity for all the great hardworking nurses and PAs and doctors who really take care of patients and know exactly what on that final mile. Because I mean, and we can talk more about sort of the Apple experience that further influenced my thinking. But anyway, those are the main 2 reasons. Is I felt like I wanted to learn what was going on within that system, within the business side of healthcare. And I also felt that there should be an opportunity for practicing clinicians to have a leadership role and sort of drive product development and things. So there's, sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's sort of the thinking at the time.
Yeah. It's still funny, Sharat, is, when I started at, it was DePuy at the time. So I started DePuy Synthes after leaving, GE. And so, power and electrical engineer. And so to me, I heard over and over again, well, you don't understand. You're not, an insider. Well, I do. I tell you, for the, it was a year or 2 where I felt like I was the least intelligent person in the building. Right. Because there's definitely a language of orthopedics. There's a learning of, just the clinical jargon. Right.
But you said the magic words. I mean, GE is an amazing management, as you know, better than I do, as a training ground in terms of, the GE capital program and things like that. And coming as an outsider, that's probably why you've been so successful. I'd say one of the reasons, because you learned things before you came into orthopedics. And so, and I think whether it's in the healthcare systems, like the large health systems, or the medical device companies or even insurance companies, I just think all the hardworking, amazing nurses and physician's assistants and nurse practitioners and doctors should be given an opportunity to be leaders in all of those healthcare professions. And I often think they're not, probably maybe a little bit unfairly so. And I'll tell you what's been interesting since I've made this career pivot. I've had so many friends from call and say, hey, I'm also interested. And it's not that, there's always, well, you couldn't handle that's far from the truth at all. It's more that there's just this lingering, again, curiosity to sort of, to influence the healthcare system and do so positively. And I'd say a couple more things. Unless you've actually been in the trenches on the front line practicing healthcare, you can talk about how the system is broken, but you don't really know until you've actually been there, been the person up at midnight, having seen 50 patients and then clicking keystrokes on the Epic EHR health record, right? And trying to have that feeling. I mean, until you've actually been there, you don't understand how broken it is that
Oh yeah.
Electronic medical records are really, they're billing systems. They're not patient engagement systems at all, not even
No.
remotely, you know? And
No.
so anyways, I
No.
mean, I'm obviously, we're going on the pontific. I don't mean to sound that way at all, but that was sort of the motivation. And I just really believe that there should be more opportunity for clinicians to influence the system positively, because I think they could, and the healthcare system at large would be a lot better off if there were more clinicians running hospitals. And this is probably an unpopular view.
Yeah. No. No, look, I think that's true. I think, you're right. If those in charge saw what it takes, for, again, the number of days I shadowed you and those like you around, and then, full day of operating and, no time to use the restroom or eat lunch, bang in X number of joints. And then at the end of the day, instead of going home to your loved ones, now you've got to sit down and do all the EMR stuff. Right. So it's just like, geez,
Then
so I think,
even if you talk about things like patient satisfaction, I mean, those of us who care for patients and do it every day for, hundreds of hours a week, I mean, we know what it is, we know what they're looking for, right? And anyway, I mean, obviously this could be a whole nother long conversation about the different segments of the system, but that was sort of the motivation. But I never intended it was going to be, sort of a permanent thing. It was always going to just dip your toe in the water and then come back, and it would be a good leadership development thing for, for a clinical career.
Yeah.
But the rest is proverbial history, of course, at this point.
Interesting. So you're there, and how does one jump from, like, again, it's, I thought mine was a traditional, like, how do you get there to Apple then, and the My Mobility?
Here's a more anecdote and story. So again, you can imagine, and you were with me, you were a big part of my clinical career. So this was 2000, and let me think, around August of 2014. So almost 10 years ago, or actually it's hard to believe, but I think July 30th was my last day. And I took 2 weeks off, and then 2 weeks later, I started, Brad, as a junior associate. They have McKinsey has sort of the different hierarchy. I started as associate level. Yeah. I think I calculated the pay cut that I took to go from clinical practice. It was like in the 85% range in terms of the pay cut I took to go from clinical practice. And here's the crazy thing, for what, as a reasonably, having a good practice and having some respect in the hospital, you were treated somewhat like a respected, clinician. I'll never forget my first day at McKinsey. I walk into the office, and my first engagement, as we call them, my first project was at a large health system in North Carolina that I won't name, but one of the very, very large health systems. And so we end up spending 6 months. As we travel on site. So I landed in North Carolina and went to the McKinsey office. And I'll never forget this moment. I had just left a clinical career. I was an attending physician, and I had pretty reasonably successful, and I say that with all humility for sure. But the senior partner on the project says, "Hey, so today's your first day. Your job is to take lunch orders for everybody, all the different." And I was taking lunch orders for people who are just out of college. And again, I've been saying, what an ironic, just a sort of to go from being an attending physician to coming here to McKinsey and taking lunch orders for the team of 10 people, including the fresh out of college graduate business analysts, all the way, and so I had to faithfully, it felt like being back in internship again. And so, so that was sort of the experience. And I'll never forget that moment. I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? Yeah. I've had a lot of what have I done moments in my life, for sure. But that was definitely one of them. So that's how it started, but that's not how it ended. I mean, it ended up being an amazing, I mean, I'll say this, if I had a sort of a magic wand, and I've told folks like, Josh Jacobs and Stu Weinstein and people like this who are leaders in the academy, I mean, I think every orthopedic surgeon should go work in, maybe either investment banking. Part of the reason we're not given a seat at the table is because, when I say the proverbial table, right, whether it's at the health system level or at the medical device company level or at the insurance company levels, because we don't have people inside those companies to ask for our voice to be heard. You see what I mean? And so if we made those networks, made those connections, I think it would fundamentally change everything in terms of, reimbursements are going down. And we should have 20 senators in the Senate that are physicians. We should, CMS should be, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services should be populated with lots of, that's my belief. That I know that may be an unpopular view, but those are some things that, have just occurred over the years.
Certainly can't hurt to have a more balanced approach. So how does, so then Apple, so, how did that transition?
Well, so I mean, so the McKinsey, the network you make when you go there, I mean, so many great connections coming out of that, and sort of almost every career step, including coming to Exactech, TPG, and Joint Medica has all been through McKinsey. So at McKinsey, we end up working with a lot of different clients, as you know. I mean, McKinsey serves very, very big companies, and so I got to do a lot of cool healthcare work, working for companies in the medical device space. And the best part about McKinsey was you kind of work with these little mini teams for 6 months at a time, so you become very, very close to. It's almost like residency, but doing it 10 times. Doing it twice a year with a new residency class, right? You end up working with people, 6 or 7 people for 6 months at a time. You get very close with them. So again, I had the chance to work at a lot of different health systems, a lot of different medical device companies, a lot of different pharmaceuticals, just amazing education. So then what ended up happening, one of the senior folks in McKinsey that I had worked with went to Apple in 2016 or so and called me one day and said, hey, Apple is working on some healthcare applications for the Apple Watch. And they want to bring in some doctors who are, again, frontline. And I applaud Apple for bringing in, some clinicians, some physicians and nurses and things to work on those projects. And so they called and said, do you want to be, sort of take a role leading some projects on the healthcare team? And thought, oh my gosh, what a cool opportunity that is to work at Apple. And so that's how I was recruited over there. And then again had a chance to join an amazing team and work with some great people, and we in addition to the Zimmer My Mobility, which of course you know a little bit about, and which is now morphed into the Persona IQ system, right? Which of course it's, as you know, sort of evolved over time. We got to work on several other projects. If you read sort of the lay press, Apple had partnerships with Aetna Insurance, and with Johnson & Johnson, others. Anyway, there were a lot of cool healthcare projects that were sort of the nexus of wearables and the Apple Watch with various, healthcare. And again, if you think about it, some of it was a medical device, some of it was with the payers, and some of it was with pharma. And so it's just a really neat opportunity to sort of understand how a wearable could be used as an adjunct in any of those 3 settings. Of course, in the Zimmer Orthopedic use case, it was trying to figure out how to use the Apple Watch to sort of help orthopedic patients recover. And see, that time, what was neat about it, Brad, it was so nascent and so early. We were really just learning and failing fast, and that was one of the cool things, is just, well, let's try to see, how this watch thing can work. And if you remember, we got to engage some amazing surgeons. You remember, we hosted a bunch of surgeons, at the Apple, at the main kind of spaceship campus, and they got to meet Jeff Williams and some of the very senior people at Apple. So that was a cool experience working there. And I guess the one other point, just back to the whole sort of soapbox about the end user. Well, one thing that Apple does, there are a few companies, Disney and Apple, and things where they are so maniacal about the user experience. And of course, in healthcare, you could argue the users are the clinician, right? Either the nurse or the physician or the patient, right? I mean, those are the users. And that, whereas at an Apple setting, the user is this person who's going to be buying an Apple Watch or buying an iPhone, right? Right? Yeah. So the amount of just testing and just, every moment of they were maniacal about making sure that the product is so easy to use. And it's no coincidence that, we all, the iPhone is one of the dominant phone. That philosophy of just having, and what they did, right? They forced their engineers to actually be users of the product so they could build, you see what I'm saying? So the analogy would be in orthopedics, it would be, well, let's force an engineer to do the surgery themselves, either in a cadaver setting from soup to nuts, and then have them design the instrument, right? And that's exactly what I'm talking about that, and that's what they do at Apple. They force them to open the box. They force them to take off the wrapper. They force them to turn it on. And they do and they do it over and over and over and over again. Yep. And that's what yields this amazing, this elegant experience that you have when you open the box, and they test the packaging. So I'm just saying that formed some of my thinking around why I believe it's so important in an insurance company to have, clinicians at the front line thinking about how patients interact with the insurance company, and at a healthcare system, having clinicians at the front line doing the intake and things like that, or designing the experience, because so I've rambled on enough about that, but it was a pretty amazing experience for working there.
Yeah. Well, it's almost back to, getting the risk of getting too deep in the engineering world. I mean, Deming's whole thing was you go find the people closest to the process because they're best able to fix it, right? So he's sending the engineers to open the boxes, now that you're the user, right? So
I mean, it'd be like designing tennis rackets without having any tennis players. I mean,
Correct,
right?
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're gonna
Yeah.
have Rafael Nadal or Roger Federer be the one who says, well, "Let me try this. Let me make an adjustment," and
Yeah. Correct.
and so I
Yeah.
think deeply embedding clinicians, not just on a traditionally, as you know, the way the model has worked is sort of the surgeon consultant sort of intermittently show up and
Yeah.
maybe work, but I mean having them actually deeply embedded in the overall company strategy. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, and so then, all that. So we've kind of covered up now to making the jump over to Exactech. So tell me a little bit about, again, I know some of the personalities involved in that, but, tell me how that, it's speaking of seats at the table for surgeons, right? I mean, so there's a kind of cool example twofold here as we move on to your story. So let's talk a little bit about Exactech.
Yeah, that was yet another McKinsey connection. Again, as you know, Exactech was purchased by a private equity firm back in 2018. And so some of the principals at that firm were also ex-McKinsey people. And so they recruited and said, hey, we're buying this company and we like it. So again, just the beneficiary, probably less of my skill set, but more around the network that I developed. Just again, it's such a privilege to be able to spend time at McKinsey. And so that was how I made the transition. And I guess it was sort of one of those things that felt, well, gosh, this is neat. You're kind of coming full circle. You're getting a leadership role now. What you always sort of preached about, that having a chance to be a leader at an orthopedic company. And so it felt like a good learning ground to sort of cut my teeth, in the medical device, in the med tech space. Now actually inside, fully embedded inside a company, running a P&L and running a business unit and things like that. And so it was a great, felt like a great learning experience, and has proved to be so. And so that was how I ended up there. It was, again, like say, a McKinsey connection, and then sort of that combined with just the background, sort of being in the right place at the right time. I suppose more than anything else, has been just has yielded really, really amazing opportunities, which I feel fortunate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But that's how and that was around end of 2019, early 2019 or so when I joined there. So about 5 years ago, I guess coming on 6 years now. It's hard to believe it's been that long.
Yeah. Well, and then of course, kind of the drum roll, and I was just at ACUS and got to see kind of underneath the hood a little bit, kind of what you're up to now with the Joint Medica thing. So I'd love to hear more about that, kind of where that's going. How'd you get into that? Kind of choose that partner, and excited to see where that's going. So love to hear a little bit about that venture.
Yeah, glad to share that. So again, as you probably recall the story, the same PE firm, Joint Medica, is a hip resurfacing company, is developing. And I don't know if you remember, when I finished my training at Rush, I came to England specifically to learn hip resurfacing, and that became a big part of my clinical practice. So I had gotten quite close to folks like Ronan Tracy and Derek McMinn and others who were resurfacing gurus of sorts. And I'd also gotten close to people at Smith and Nephew, like Russell Walter and Terry Smith and Roger Ashton and people like that, who had developed the initial BHR. Well, in about 2019 or so, Terry Smith and Derek McMinn, again, who were sort of, as you know, were sort of seminal in the development of the initial BHR, called, and this is when I was working at Exactech, and said, hey, we are developing a next generation metal on polyethylene hip resurfacing that we think, and of course, the metal on metal story needs no, especially I'm guessing the audience that listens to your podcast are going to know a lot about that sort of the metal sort of challenges that we had over the last 15 years. And so again, even though resurfacing, speaking of groomsmen, again, if I remember, one of my groomsmen's father has 2 hip resurfacing that I put in. He's 12 years out now and still doing well. So I mean, I believe in the operation just like I do. To me, the hip resurfacing is the uni of the hip, right? The partial knee of the uni compartment. So anyway, the way this all came about is, so again, Derek McMinn and Terry Smith called in about 2019, said, hey, we're developing this next generation of hip resurfacing. Would you like to work with us? And so we said that we were at Exactech. We said, yes, of course, we'd like to work with you. And so it ended up that this private equity firm ended up buying Joint Medica, and that transaction happened in 2023, and end of 2023. Sorry, I guess, third quarter of 2023. And so then I had a chance to sort of join the team there in a leadership role, and join this amazing team that includes folks like Russell Walter from Smith and Nephew, and Terry Smith from Smith and Nephew, and Roger Ash, all these folks that had been seminal in the BHR development. So that's kind of how that opportunity came about. And so now our Joint Medica, the mission is, and we're sort of making great progress. Again, I have the privilege of being part of an amazing team there. We're making a lot of progress towards, getting the regulatory approvals for this next generation metal on polyethylene hip resurfacing that sort of addresses all of the objections, all of the, you want to say there are some compromises you make when you develop a metal resurfacing device. This new one will address a lot of those compromises.
I don't know if I ever told you the story, Sharat. So I was at Zimmer on the hip team, and I had the job of launching their brand new metal on metal hip. It was post-Durham. The Durham had been pulled off the market.
Post-Durham, okay, got it.
Yeah, and I figured it was a ZMR. Not the ZMR, it was a Z. Geez, I don't even remember the name of it. It was big head metal on metal.
Right.
It was kind of like the Biomet at the time, very similar to
the Biomet Magnum, yeah.
And so we launched it at Academy the same day J&J pulled theirs off the market.
Oh, geez, bad timing.
Talk about an education. Yeah, and I remember Bill Griffin, close friend, I'm like, Bill, what's going on? And he pointed me to the arc of coverage paper and some other stuff, which really, really helped understand a lot. So again, having friends in the business, to your point, I mean, those closest to it, like that read the science, it was super helpful.
But this nuance, Brad, is worth maybe a couple of minutes of just taking the pit stop as we're talking. Yeah, metal total hips are a very different animal. Large head metal total hips are a completely different animal versus metal hip resurfacing, right? I mean, we could spend a whole podcast even talking about that, right? But I mean, 100%. And so it's unfortunate that what happened is that metal total hips sort of did tarnish with the same brush. And otherwise, I mean, if you look at the clinical results of the BHR, again, the implant developed by, again, I had the privilege of all these folks are part of my team now, Ian Bowen and Tim Ban, all the folks, Russell and Terry, the whole team, they developed that implant. And the clinical results at 25 years now of that implant are nothing short of just stellar, right? If you look at the registry data, and it's just so unfortunate what happened that, and what we can talk, again, that's a whole other podcast episode, but resurfacing as an operation has a lot of benefits, and and this is not just my opinion. There's a lot of literature now on the benefits of resurfacing. Anyway, but I think, and this is a credit to sort of folks like Derek McMahon and Ronan Tracy and others. They saw the writing on the wall in 2015 or 2016 or so, and realized that even though the clinical results of the BHR are outstanding, it's probably going to die because the metal sort of catastrophe that we had with metal total hips is irrecoverable. And so they had the humility, and this was just a testament to that team, that group of folks, that they had the wherewithal to sort of develop, swallow their, they'd already developed an implant system that was very successful, and to have it sort of killed by the industry, but then have the sort of the tenacity, right, to go back to the drawing board and develop a round two. And so it's just a privilege to be a part of that. So anyway, the point is we now have a metal on polyethylene, highly cross-linked vitamin E polyethylene hip resurfacing that has all the same features that made the BHR very, very successful. And we're making great progress. We have an amazing team.
Well, and to that point, Sharat, I learned at the meeting at AUKUS, I mean, the reduced mortality rate, which is super interesting, right? And the number of pro athletes that have resurfacing, right? So, to me, there's a story there for sure, right?
And then the data is pretty clear, right? People who have heavy labor jobs, people who need to go back to the military, things like that, they tend to do better with a hip resurfacing that they can't do with a total hip. And then on the mortality piece, I mean, that again, if you want to stir up some controversy, we can talk about the sort of the mortality difference at 10 years of people who receive a hip resurfacing versus those who receive a regular total hip. And there's some pretty fascinating data it's pretty hard to. The numbers are so big, right? And that data comes from the British Hip Registry, and things like that. It's hard to dispute. This is in tens of thousands of patients that have shown a difference. And that data has been repeated at the Cleveland Clinic and at the University of New South Wales University of Sydney. And, all over the world, it's been repeated, that mortality data.
I'm excited. What's success look like? Last question for you on that side, what's success look like for this, for you?
just such a privilege to be part of a great team and be able to, work with this team. And so what success looks like for our team is pretty easy answer to the question. It's really, I'd say three things. Number one, it's everybody on the team sort of having a chance to do something great in their careers, make this product successful and stay in the company or go on to, other great things. That to me is number one, sort of the success of the individual team members is sort of number one. Number two, we've got a lot of great surgeons who are involved in our company. And so giving them the chance to sort of have a second coming of resurfacing and let them get out in the world and teach it and help lots of patients out there. And number three, it's sort of helping patients around the world understand the benefits of resurfacing and sort of making it the mainstream operation it should have always been, right? And now that we've gotten rid of the sort of the bearing issues, that's number three. And then finally, maybe a more, less sort of a more tactical one, it's getting our regulatory approval, our FDA, and then of course other markets in the EU and Australia and things for our Polymotion hip resurfacing implant. Those are, I think, the four things I would say the success looks like, and even potentially in that order. If we can do all those things, that'll be really great to be able to be a part of something like that.
Well, Sharat, this has been fantastic, my friend. I appreciate you joining us from overseas. Where in the world are you again?
Oh, so I'm actually, Joint Medica, his headquarters are in Worcester, which is where the sauce is from. Worcestershire sauce. I'm in the home of Worcestershire sauce. It's reminiscent of my McKinsey travel schedule in terms of the amount of travel we're doing, but it's been really fun to work with this team. And we've got a great team. But I appreciate the opportunity to join the podcast. And it's a privilege and an honor. And like I say, you've been a dear friend, and thanks for everything you've done to help my career.
Right back at you. You've been a big supporter of mine as well. And before we wrap up, we always we ask all of our guests, and I'm super curious for you, Sharat, kind of what does wealth that matters mean for Sharat Kusuma?
It's actually really easy. It's three things. Number one, it's working because you want to, not because you have to. Number one, right? So there's being able, that was sort of the ability to switch careers has been so amazing, because the learning experience has just been unbelievable, and it may not be for everybody, but for me, just the ability. So that's number one. Being able to. Number two, it's doing work that every day feels meaningful, feels like you're making, what they used to say at Apple is like making a small dent in a unit, right? It's a famous Steve Jobs quote, making a dent in the universe, but you feel like you're doing something that's really going to mean something beyond when you're gone, when your career's over, that you left a lasting impact, right? And then finally, number three, it's having sort of the balance between work and life where, I have young kids right now, as you said, I think you've met my kids before, but 7 and 3, and just having sort of the ability to spend time with them and sort of really spend quality time with them, with my kids and my family. I think if you merge all three of those things together, that to me, there's not a monetary element to any of those really. It's more about, it's more about just having meaning and purpose and all the different elements.
Sharat, thanks again very much. I know, how busy you are to take time out of the calendar to join us. So for our listeners, if you've enjoyed listening today, make sure you like and subscribe and follow the Doctor's Eyes Only podcast from Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors. If you don't have an advisor and you're looking for help to figure out your wealth that matters, make sure you send us a note, connect directly with us at myteam@vestia.com. Again, that's myteam@vestia.com. Thanks very much and have a great day.
Thanks, Brad. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Doctor's Eyes Only podcast. We hope today's conversation advanced your journey toward wealth that matters. Make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our amazing episodes. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Vestia Advisors, LLC. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. It should not be construed as legal or tax advice and is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified attorney or tax advisor. This information is not an offer or a solicitation to buy or sell securities. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Before investing, you should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses associated with investment products. Investment decisions should be based on an individual's own goals, time horizon, and tolerance for risk. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Diversification and asset allocation do not ensure a profit or guarantee against loss. Consult your financial professional before making any investments. Investment advisory services offered through Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, Vestia Retirement Plan Consultants, and Vestia Advisors LLC. Securities offered through Osdale Financial Partners, Inc., 5187 Utica Ridge Road, Davenport, Iowa, 52807. Member, FINRA, SIPC. Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, Vestia Retirement Plan Consultants, Vestia Advisors LLC, and Osdale Financial Partners, Inc. are independently owned and operated.